Takeaways from the first night of the Republican National Convention. The first case of coronavirus reinfection is confirmed. Plus, what Jerry Seinfeld has to say to everyone declaring the end of New York City. Here's what you need to know. Good morning. This is Cheddar's Need2Know podcast for Tuesday, August 25th. I am Jill Wagner with Carlo Versano. Hey, Carlo. Good morning.
Morning, Jill. How are we today?
We are good. A late night for me. I actually stayed up to watch the convention.
I tried. I really did. I just couldn't. And the worst thing is I woke up, how when you wake up, when your alarm sounds and you're in the middle of having like a really good dream? I was having one of those today. That's just the worst, isn't it? Well, we should do that as a love-hate-8.
No. And then you're like, no, take me back.
Yeah, exactly.
By the way, whenever I have dreams, they do not exist in this time period. They are from previous, pre-COVID, wherever we are now. Yeah.
It's funny because whenever I dream, it's almost always like terrifying nightmares. And last night I don't even remember what it was, but I was having some really enjoyable experience in my subconscious, but not as enjoyable as this.
All right. Well, let's back to reality. And get to some news. The GOP officially nominated President Trump to a second term the first night of its scaled back convention. Speakers like Nikki Haley, Senator Tim Scott, Congressman Matt Gaetz, and Donald Trump Jr. hailed the president's coronavirus response. They decried cancel culture and painted a dark and dystopian vision of America if Joe Biden were to win.
According to the programming that the RNC put out ahead of this, last night was supposed to tell the story about the party's values and ideals. And from everything I can gather, watching the highlights, it was not that at all. It was really about, Democrats sort of being, this evil party, and there's one man who can protect us from that evil. It just felt a little tired to me. I thought that the knock on the DNC was that it was too dark and gloomy. This felt pretty dark and gloomy to me. The big question I have all week is, what does the Republican Party of 2020 stand for? Under Ronald Reagan, it's sort of, I guess you could say it stood for small government, right? Under George W. Bush, it stood for this idea of spreading, freedom around the world. Now, regardless of what you think about, those specific ideals, those were ideals that everyone sort of knew. What does the GOP of Trump stand for? I don't really know. There's this term in production called a log line, which is just a way of saying a brief summation of what a show or a movie is about, like what you would pitch to somebody in an elevator. The central thesis or the conflict.
A show about nothing.
Yeah, exactly. That would be the Seinfeld log line, right? So what is the log line for the Republicans? For Democrats, it's actually fairly well articulated, right? It's about defeating Donald Trump. That's the log line this year for the Democrats. And they actually do have a platform and policy proposals that you may disagree with, but the log line is fairly simple. I don't know what it is for the Republicans.
Yeah, Carlo, it was clear from watching last night that the Trump administration realizes that he's weak on coronavirus in terms of where American people are right now in polling. Many not happy with the U.S. response. And it felt like there was a bit of a revisionist history last night in terms of his administration's response. So they showed a video montage using sound bites from Andrew Cuomo, Nancy Pelosi, Bill de Blasio really early on, saying that this thing was not a big deal. Of course, they didn't show the president saying that it wasn't a big deal and was going to miraculously go away. And then they cut to the president making the decision to shut down the border with China, and stopping travel, expediting a vaccine, getting everybody the PPE they needed. It was a bit surreal because we lived through this. We're still living through it. And I think objectively, regardless of what side of the aisle you're on, and I don't want to be too political here, but objectively, the U.S. response to this pandemic has been a failure. We have by far more cases and more deaths per capita than almost anywhere in the world, and we're still in the thick of it.
Well, yeah, and there was a poll that came out last week that I believe was from Morning Consult that asked this question that was really interesting to me. They asked by party affiliation, if do you believe that the coronavirus death toll in America is acceptable? And I believe it was something like 57-60% of Republicans said that it was. And I mean, I don't know how 170,000 dead Americans and counting from this. I don't think anybody could say is acceptable, but. The Democrats are you better off now than you were 4 years ago, right? That's the famous line from Ronald Reagan. I think that would certainly apply here. I don't know how, it's very hard for me to see how anyone in this country could believe that their lives are in a better place than they were 4 years ago. I mean, maybe like Jeff Bezos, but I'm not even sure about that, right? Like, so I don't know. We'll see. But the first night of this, it felt very revisionist, and it felt. It was just like, I mean, we knew this was going to be like this, right? It's the Trump show. That's what the party is under him.
Tonight is going to feature Melania Trump. Also giving speeches Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State, Senator Ron Paul, and Nick Sandmann, who's that student from Covington High School in Kentucky who had that viral video confrontation with a Native American activist on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial last year.
Pompeo, by the way, he's in the Middle East right now traveling. He's going to beam in from there. I know that nobody cares anymore, but just for the record, that's not how this usually goes. It's a longstanding tradition that the sitting Secretary of State doesn't engage in sort of like overt partisan activity. So he will be breaking that tradition today.
All right, I want to do a check on the various extreme weather events happening in this country right now. Marco made landfall last night near the mouth of the Mississippi River and quickly weakened to a tropical depression. Meanwhile, Laura is right on its heels. It is now expected to strengthen into a major hurricane before making landfall along the Texas-Louisiana border late tomorrow.
Yeah, so the good news is Marco wasn't as bad as it could have been. That thing is now spinning out. I think there was, some winds and heavy rain along sort of like the mouth of the Mississippi along the Louisiana coast, but not as bad as it could have been. The bad news is Laura is now looking potentially quite bad. They're saying it's the forecast is now for it to become a Category 2 by the time it makes landfall, like you said, late tomorrow, possibly early Thursday. So we got to keep watching that. Also, keep in mind, this is where all the oil refineries, all the oil rigs are. Right, so that could, you take those oil rigs offline for a few days, gas prices go up. So expect that to happen as well. Also on extreme weather, just a quick check on the fires. The firefighters in California did catch a much needed break yesterday. Dangerous lightning storms that we talked about. They were going to bring high winds and lightning, but not a lot of rain. They did not materialize. That's great news. So officials are saying this week is going to be critical in getting these infernos under control. At least 7 people are dead in these fires. The state's air quality currently among the worst in the world, worse than India, which of course, is bad even when there's not a, respiratory virus in the air, right?
Yes, and now on to some COVID headlines now. The first documented case of a COVID-19 patient being reinfected with the virus has been confirmed by researchers in Hong Kong. Experts say this is not unusual among coronaviruses. It is coming, of course, as the U.S. 7-day average of daily deaths fell below 1,000 over the weekend for the first time since July. So that's some encouraging news that perhaps this summer surge may be petering out, although we're still clocking tens of thousands of new cases a day, including some new clusters at several colleges in Kansas.
Yeah, so the reinfection thing, I don't think it's freak out worthy. I know that it sort of made a little bit of a media, sort of freaked a lot of people out when they heard it yesterday. But like you said, I mean, this is coronaviruses reinfect, right? That's like that's why you got to get a flu shot every year. It's bad news for herd immunity, but we already sort of knew that wasn't going to work here. The patient in question in this study in Hong Kong didn't make antibodies the first time around, but than he or she did after they were infected the second time, which I think suggests that it sort of depends on the severity of the infection, right? Which would make sense in terms of like how many of your antibodies are activated, right?
Right. So the worst case you get the first time around, you're, I guess, less likely to get it. But I'll disagree with you here in that I do think that this is a big deal, just because I think what it shows, I think the conventional wisdom had been, once you get it once, even if you're asymptomatic, or even if you have a really mild case, you kind of have this free pass and you could go back to work safely and you could,
Hmm.
and I just think it complicates everything. And I think again, herd immunity, where we were saying there were places like in India that had reached it. I don't know. To me, I had posted something about this on social media, and I got a lot more of a response than I normally do. And I'm not saying it's a huge deal, but
Yeah.
I do think it just shows that this thing where there's a lot we're learning about it, and it's going to be here for a while.
No, well, yeah, that's true. I guess I sort of had already come to the sort of like conclusion earlier in this that it was sort of going to be around for a while. So that's why this didn't really freak me out as much. But
So here's what bothered me about it is that the second time around, he had a different strain. So it's not like it was like that the first time around, his antibody, he just didn't really have a strong immune response. It sounded like this because he was infected with a second strain of it. Like that's what
I see,
I don't know.
right.
That's what again, not a freak out thing.
Yeah.
I do think this is something like, okay, now we know that this is official and this is happening.
No, we gotta watch it. Absolutely.
Okay, just next, this is a huge story. The National Guard deployed to Kenosha, Wisconsin, a day after a video emerged that showed Kenosha police officers repeatedly shooting Jacob Blake, a 29-year-old black man, in the back as he walked away with his 3 young sons looking on. That video has sparked 2 straight nights of protests and riots. Last night, what began as peaceful protests devolved into violence. Arsonists torched a lot of the black business district of Kenosha, defying an overnight curfew.
Yeah. Mr. Blake, the victim here, he survived that shooting, and he is in stable condition in the hospital, which is frankly shocked by after having to watch that horrific video. So some good news there, and hopefully we'll be able to hear from him. These police officers have been put on administrative leave, but they are being, protesters are asking for them to be fired, which of course is something that we've seen, time and time again in these situations. So I don't want to say that you should go out and watch this video because it's really upsetting, but it's hard. These stories, like, it's hard. What are you going to say? Like, the shooting looks really unnecessary. I don't know what else to say about that. Like, I don't think you should be shot for walking away from the police. That's obviously, Jill. That's not to say that. I don't think that torching, the business district of a city is the response to that.
Okay, switching gears here. Jerry Falwell Jr. has apparently resigned as president of Liberty University after resigning and then pulling his resignation when it was reported in the media. So now it appears that his time at the conservative religious school that his father founded is at or near an end. This big development came when a former business associate alleged that he had a years-long relationship with Falwell's wife, with Falwell's blessing and participation. It's all a little confusing. This is just the latest time when his private life that had come under scrutiny in recent months. Falwell's among the most prominent and influential evangelical leaders in this country, as well as a staunch supporter of President Trump.
That's why this story is newsworthy. I think, you could argue that he helped Trump win, actually, because Jerry Falwell Jr. gave evangelical Christians in 2016 sort of the blessing or the cover to vote for a man who is, by all accounts, everything that they say that they are against, right? Students at Liberty University, by the way, which is in Virginia, and I went to school in Virginia, so it was it was sort of like a well-known thing at this school that they have these really, I don't want to say they're crazy rules, but they're really conservative rules. You have to be celibate unless you're married. You get a $50 fine if you're caught with an R-rated movie in your dorm. You have community service if you're caught sleeping over with a member of the opposite sex, and like a $500 fine. This guy was their leader, right? The hypocrisy is what makes this story newsworthy. Normally my view on these sorts of things is like, it's none of our business, right? These are adults, like they can do whatever they want, and they don't deserve to have their personal life dragged through the media. But when you build your career on being this sort of like a moral figure that stands for traditional family values, and then it turns out you're frolicking with the literal pool boy, then I don't know, right? I think maybe you deserve to be humiliated.
Yeah, I'm gonna just hands off that one. But okay, I want to switch gears. We're gonna just finish this podcast in a totally different direction. I don't know if anyone had a chance to read it yesterday, but Jerry Seinfeld had a great op-ed in the New York Times, and basically he says he is done with people proclaiming the death of New York City. The comedian wrote an essay in the Times decrying some putz on LinkedIn who had declared in a viral blog that the Big Apple was completely dead in the aftermath of the pandemic. So Seinfeld says, wipe your tears, wipe your butt, and pull it together. I laughed out loud, and I also felt like he is what we need right now. Somebody kind of defending the Big Apple.
I don't know if
I appreciated it.
I did too, and I don't know if this is a phenomenon in other big cities in the country, and I'm curious if other people in cities like LA or Dallas or Miami or whatever. But it is among my least favorite debates that's happening in New York City right now, and it's typically being waged by people who sort of like packed up and left town back in March. It's like shut up. Right? Like there's no question that New York City is in trouble. No question about it. And a lot of cities in this country are in trouble. And I think it's going to get worse before it gets better, given the budgetary issues that these cities are facing. In New York, we have a separate issue, which is that we have no leadership, right? We have a mayor who is utterly incompetent and widely hated. But most cities cities in America, most big cities are resilient, right? New York City is a resilient town. We got through 9/11. We got through the financial crisis. I think that we're going to get through this. So I don't know that, but Seinfeld sort of took, he expressed a view that I certainly had.
Well, one of the things that he started it by saying, I moved to the city in the 70s. There was no pooper scooper laws. There were no, it was what it was. I parked, I got my car towed, and I fell in love with the city, and just the idea being that it is an imperfect place, but he talks about the energy of being in the city and the energy of, quite frankly, being in an office, which you and I have talked about. And he's saying, he's kind of poo-pooed this idea that everyone's just going to be working remotely from here on out, saying people don't really like it. Yes, obviously we've talked about people like flexibility, et cetera, but there is just something about having creative energy and being in person that you can't replicate over a Zoom meeting. And that is why he says, you know what, the New York City is going to come back.
Look, I totally agree with that. And I think, as a New Yorker, like one of my favorite things and, one of my favorite little things of New York is like when you get out of work and it's rush hour. Everybody like hates rush hour, but I love that feeling of like that energy of just those like thousands of people streaming into the subway or into Grand Central, or just on the street. Like that's exactly what you mean, right? Like that's this sense of energy that you can't really put your finger on, but when you don't have it, it's noticeable. Right. I think it makes us all feel like a little more lethargic and, there's more of like a malaise about life right now, I think, without that.
Yeah. I mean, look, I'm somebody who moved out of the city, so I did feel some shame
and I didn't mean,
reading this.
And I didn't mean to shame you at all, Jill. I mean, first of all, you have a baby and you have to do everything for your family. I more get annoyed at the people like on social media who are, tweeting from their families, summer house in the Hamptons or whatever about New York City is dead. It's like, shut up.
But I actually mourn my old life. I feel sad about it. I pack my bags crying. When I packed my apartment, I was literally sobbing, just because I love New York.
That's tough.
And I had to make a decision based on what was right for my family, and my husband felt strongly about leaving. But I'm rooting for New York, and I would never count it out.
Plus, you're only a train ride away, so it's not like you moved to like Antarctica,
which sounds great right about now.
Yeah.
Okay, let's leave it there. That's what you need to know for Tuesday, August 25th.
Thanks, guys.